The second example is quite a bit different, much more rhythmic and groovy. The note choice is not overly more complicated than the previous one, but the groove is more interesting. And the tone that we're using is different, and it all plays into how the bass actually works here. So check this sound out in isolation first. Much more punchy and tight, right? It's a quite textured sound, but it's still dark. The point is that it's got a real kick to it. The attack on it is quite strong, so it functions almost like its own drum, even though it's going to be influenced and working with the kick and the snare. It's almost like a kind of percussion in and of itself, and that's essential to the groove that's going on here, and was a decision I had to make when making this track and designing the sound. Is what is the role of the bass here? And here it's got this rhythmic groove creating function, so the sound has to reflect that. If we replace the sound with one that doesn't work for this kind of groove, but still on its own sounds cool, like you might hear this in a preset library and think, oh yeah, that's pretty killer. It's fat. But when you put it in the groove, it's not tight enough, it's not punchy enough. Too much going on in the sound. Switching back to the original. So you can see how much the tone matters. It's huge. It's huge. So let's take a look at the note choice here. With the chord progression is very simple. A minor, F major, G major. They got some extensions, but it doesn't matter for us in this case, thinking about the bass. There's a very common chord progression, A minor, F major, G major. And the bass is really just ping-ponging between these octaves mainly, but that's because we're not going for something particularly fancy with the note choices. We're going for a groove creating thing. Something that's gonna get your head bobbing really quick, right? We do have some runs, and we're gonna look into this in just a second, but what I wanna direct your attention to first is an idea of splitting high notes and low notes into almost their own world. Now, of course, when I'm writing the line, I am thinking about it as a whole, do-de-doom, that's clear, but the low notes are like their own melody in my mind, and the high notes are their own melody. You can see the low notes are just kind of following the root note here, but the high notes are hanging out on an A throughout. Then on the F, it drops down to F, up to A, which is the third of that chord, hits the A again, then we're on to a G. So the upper note is doing a G and a B, which is the third of its chord. So I'm gonna play the groove once more and just pay special attention to the way that these upper notes relate, basically, over time. See what I mean? These are like their own little world. Stating something over and over, lower, back up to the original, original, lower, even higher than the original, and back. So it creates, this is a kind of like an enclosure, F, A, heading towards G. This is a kind of enclosure, G, B, heading towards A. So the way I think about this is the melody is getting like frozen in time. You state the A, and it just hangs out there while the low notes do their thing. A, low notes do their thing. Then you hear F, A, low notes do their thing. So it's like you've got almost a counterpoint going on with a low melody and an upper melody. Of course, they do fuse into a single line, but when I'm thinking about what notes to choose for these top ones, that's the thought process I'm going through, is creating something interesting where this goes up and hangs out and gets completed. Then it goes up and hangs out and gets completed by coming back to the A here. For the runs, this is just running up this is an A minor pentatonic scale basically towards this A. And these runs are just going, walking up, approaching A, going down, we're skipping over the note, we're going down the same three notes we just came up, but they're skipping over the note that the melody is gonna hit right here, right? So again, it's doing this thing where it kind of hangs a note in the air and then it completes it here. So here again, hangs a note in the air. We walk back up to it, same first two notes as before, but we're jumping over the tone we're trying to then hear, which is the root of the next chord. So we don't need to always just use octaves. We can go, this could have been the 9th here, and then this could have been the 3rd. That's cool too, right? Going 1, 2, 3 of that chord, dropping down to 1 here. I didn't choose to do it originally, but we could have done that. Groove-wise, once again, I put the kick and snare down here muted so we can see. Here's a kick, a snare, and so on like this. So these ones are snares, these ones are kicks. So let's just listen to the way that this bass pattern feels against these kicks and snares. I'm just gonna solo the drums and the bass right now, no other instruments. We've got kicks lining up with certain hits. And then we've got bass notes offset by 1/16 from important hits that are happening in the drum groove, like the snare. Right? So this snare hits with nothing on it, and right away, we get this coming in. The reason we want to do that is because this is a percussive style bass line with a sound that's really like a kind of its own percussion instrument. If we only hit on the drums, then you can't hear the percussive quality of the bass and you don't get the interesting syncopation that goes between them. So in this case, we're offsetting some bass notes from the drum groove. Happens here too, where we've got a kick and then we've got the bass note that comes after the kick instead of on the kick. Dum, dum. An important thing to note with this, which we haven't touched on yet, is the ends of notes. The ends of notes in a bass part are hugely important as the onset of the note, especially when your bass sound has a sustain to it and has a strong cutoff. So here we're stopping this note dead right on the start of the snare. So it's like these parts are linked, right? It's like the kick is turning these notes on, basically, do-da-doo, and the snare stops it. Right? Interfacing these two elements in the most interesting and harmonious way possible, such that important, interesting hits that are not being hit by the drums do get hit by the bass, and that when the bass is sustaining, perhaps it gets turned off, not at a random time, but specifically when a certain drum hit happens, like is the case with this snare or some other ones through here. This particular groove is just establishing one rhythmic figure, and we're hearing it over and over again. Because the rhythmic figure, in my opinion, is so strong and creates the whole feeling of the thing, I don't want to just abandon it right away. So here we state it, and we just state it over and over again with this little fill at the end. The only difference is the last one says da-da-da-da instead of da-da-da, right? This is just a final statement. We've heard it with 3 notes, 3 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes. So just for contrast, here's a version of the line that has less interesting syncopation, is more tightly glued to the drum hits, and the endings of the notes aren't as interesting in terms of where they turn on and off. So let's check that out. It's not terrible, still sounds cool, but in my opinion, it lacks a bit of the interesting syncopated groove creation that the first one had. That's it for example number 2. Let's move on to the last example, most interesting example, number 3.